Good morning. Barry Bryson here, thanking you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. We're continuing our introduction of the Gospel of Mark, and today we're going to talk about the text of the Gospel of Mark itself. The text of the Gospel of Mark is unique, really, in the New Testament. The language itself is the least polished of any language in the Bible, and I think there's a good reason for that. And it's not just that Mark or any of the other sources of the gospel were speaking Greek as a second language. That's not going to be an issue. Day of Pentecost proves that, although the writers of the New Testament use the Greek language in different ways, and Luke himself is a very polished writer. John, by the end of his life, has a limited vocabulary, but is such a gifted stylist with that vocabulary. Paul, is such an educated, broadly educated man and has such facility with argument and with language. Matthew, sturdy, writes like a man who knows Hebrew first and who's thinking Hebrew in his head as he's writing Greek. Mark's gospel, the grammar in it is just not good. It's just not in any way polished. And I think there's a reason for that, because I believe very strongly that Mark really isn't a book or a letter or anything that was intended to be primarily a text, but a script or a transcript. I believe, and we'll talk more about this when we talk about authorship next time, I believe that what we have is either the text of a sermon or more likely the transcript or the notes taken when someone preaches. I think that Mark was originally delivered orally and then written down, or written down to be delivered orally. A lot of ancient texts were originally communicated orally. There are the Iliad and the Odyssey clearly were delivered orally before they were ever written down, and are much older than the texts that we have, and much older than the original texts that were written down. And in an ancient text, you can that long texts that are delivered and repeated over and over again, and you want to get all the words right and get all the details correct in your retelling. You find in these texts mnemonic devices, repeated phrases that happen at certain intervals that help the singer or the talker remember the text accurately. So, we have the rage of Achilles and the wine dark sea, in the Iliad and the Odyssey. And even in the book of Genesis, we have phrases that mold the text, that let you know these stories were being told, shared by the patriarchs before Moses started to write them down. Phrases like, and it came to pass, and it came to pass, and it came to pass. These are the generations of. These are the generations of. And we have those markers in Mark's gospel, particularly the word immediately. Everything happens immediately, but there are others, and we'll talk more about those later in our introduction. So there's that. There are those markers, those mnemonic devices inside the text that indicate that this was spoken, that this is a script or a transcript of what's being spoken. When we talk about authorship tomorrow, I think that's a very strong argument that this is a script or a transcript, because the sources for authorship, the oldest ones, indicate that that's exactly what it is, that Mark was making notes. He was writing down what he was hearing preached, and that Mark, the Gospel of Mark, basically represents him writing down what he heard preached in the earliest days of the sharing of the gospel. The details in the Gospel of Mark are so vivid. The storytelling is set at such a quick pace, so it's full of action. There are no sermons in the Gospel of Mark. There are no long discourses. There are very few parables. They're just pithy sayings direct teaching that Jesus can get across in a verse or two, and lots of action. We have our senses engaged in this book in a way that we do not in any of the other three Gospels. We're told little details over and over again that bring the text to life. Things like when Jesus fed the 5,000, they sat down on the green grass and they were sitting in rows like the rows in the garden. When Jesus was sleeping in the back of the boat, when he stilled the storm, his head was resting on a seat cushion. We have those kinds of vivid detail. Also, Mark, as a storyteller, or this gospel in its storytelling, often delays an essential fact of the story to the end. So it's almost like an O. Henry story or a Damon Runyon story, where we get something at the end that changes the entire color of the story itself. Like the raising of Jairus' daughter. She's called a baby girl throughout the whole story. We don't find out till the very end that she was 12 years old, that she was a year or two away from being engaged. That was the age of engagement in their culture. And so I really do believe that when we're picking up the Gospel of Mark, this is pure gospel. The word gospel means good news. An evangelist, and that word is from the same word as gospel, is someone who is a messenger, who's bringing the good news. This is a spoken gospel. And that's why I think the language is not so polished. If you ever see an actual transcript of anything you've ever said, and you read that back, when it's written down and all the ums are there and all the faux pas are there, of the words that you've chosen, the way you repeat things, the way you have filler, the way you let your the rules of language slip in your spoken language. When that gets down on paper, word for word, letter for letter, for and for it looks almost intelligible at times. And so I think there's a good reason why. And it's not because Mark is not a good stylist, because we're going to see as we read that he is. This is verbal. This is a script or a transcript, and I think more likely a transcript. He's writing down what he's hearing preached. And we'll talk a little bit more about that when we talk about authorship next time. Thank you for joining me for 5 Good Minutes.